What's up, Lizzo fans? On today's show, we're digging deeper into season 3, episode 6 of The Mandalorian. Welcome to the Story Geeks show, officially part of the Orange Grove 55 network. Even OG doesn't call it a network, but I call it a network because it's got a lot of shows on here. Let's dig deeper into episode 6. We're glad that everybody is out there joining us today to talk about this very divisive episode. We've got people who like it. We've got people who hate it. And we got a lot to talk about as it relates to The Mandalorian and episode 6. The episode before the penultimate episode. So we've only got 2 more episodes left of this season, which is somewhat surprising based on where we saw this episode go. So we've got some things to talk about there as well. But let me introduce my illustrious panel of some of my really good friends here. I'm going to go clockwise. OG55, tell the people, well, where it's your channel, so they can find you here. But where else can they find you? On Twitter and everywhere else?
Yeah, you can find me right here on Orange Grove 55, where we talk everything, nerd culture, theme parks, you name it, with great shows like Story Geeks, hosted by this gentleman right here, Mr. Jay Sherer. And you can find me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55, where just doing a lot of opinions and hot takes or whatever, and like everybody else on there. So, well, yeah, pretty much. Well, maybe a little more than everybody else. I don't know. But you can find me there. And Jay, again, thank you, brother, for having me on. I can't wait to talk about some Mandalorian.
Oh, yeah, it's been great. We've had a great series ahead of us, and part of the reason it has been great is because we've had fantastic co-hosts and we've had fantastic guests. One of the other co-hosts that's been consistent, showing up every week, Vash Guy, Dre, all the number of titles that I could just start to list off, all these titles. The president of the Reedy Creek Entertainment District, I believe, at this point. So, Dre, tell the folks where they can find you and what you've been up to.
What I've been up to is watching Mandalorian and looking at all the online discussion. That's what I've been up to lately. It's been very, very interesting, which I'm sure we'll get into. But if you guys want to find me, you can go ahead and do so right down there at Vash Sky. Just go ahead, type that in, and it should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, or the network. I like that, Jay. The network you're watching right now, Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows, including the one you're watching right here, Story Geeks with Jay. Well, we're going to be breaking down, well, as you're going to see, everything about the season, but also, too, I think we're going to get into maybe some backstory onto why this might actually be taking place. Should be very, very interesting. But also, too, Citrus Corner with our good friend and brother George, where we talk about everything Walt Disney World related. Orange Grove 55, an Orange Nerd, hosted by the person above me, where we go into everything C-suite related as it relates to the Walt Disney Company, and some of the stories behind the screen, let's say, and my own, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh, right from the Grove. Here we go.
That's such an epic sound. You know what I mean? Like how long did they mess around with sound before they went, that's the sound, right? Like,
I know, right? It's so good.
It's just so good. It's so good. And then down below me here, we have Brian Dillon from Fanbase Press. We had, what episode was it, Brian? Was it episode 3?
3?
Yeah, 2 or 3?
I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, but one of those, yeah.
It is always a pleasure to talk to Bryant. Bryant has a fantastic show and operates a comic book company. So if you're interested in digging deeper into all kinds of different stories, the Fanbase Press podcast is a great place to find all of that stuff. But you should also pick up some of the comics that they are producing over there as well. Bryant, where can the people find you and get involved with what you're doing?
Well, look for us at fanbasepress.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Comic Book Slayer.
Nice. And perfect. And I will say that I am going to be on Bryant's show talking about The Mandalorian in a few weeks. Just come up here in a few weeks.
Right after we wrap up this season. Yep.
Yeah, it's something going to be super cool. Now, I have to ask you before we jump into the questions, you have a dollar bill over your left shoulder. Yes. At least on my screen, it's your left shoulder. What is the significance of that dollar bill?
This I'm looking the wrong way. Here, this, just so people can see it in the stream, this is a dollar bill that I received at Comic-Con the year before Dark Knight Returns came out.
Cool.
Basically, they had filtered these Joker dollars into the Comic-Con crowd, and I was buying some comics, and the dealer pulled me to the side, and he said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to give you this, but you probably don't want to spend it." And he pointed it out, and it was they did some amazing viral marketing for that film. That was just a little bit of it, but yeah, I've been holding on to that dollar bill ever since then.
That's
awesome. Yeah, that's super cool. Well, welcome to the show. We are going to dig deeper into this episode, and there's a lot of opinions swirling around this episode too. So we might not get as deep. We might go a little bit into the background of like when something is this divisive. There are usually reasons that we can pull out for why that divisiveness exists. So we're going to try to get to some of that stuff as well. Do want to give a shout out to Theme Park Casual, awesome channel. Go follow Theme Park Casual, Matthew Meir, Aliyah Aloha, all in the chat. And we will get to, as we do always in this show, we are going to go talk through 3 questions this week. At the end of those 3 questions, we're going to go back and talk about some of the things that you bring up in the comments as well. So be sure to leave any questions or comments you have that you want us to address. Leave them there because we will come back around to those questions later on in the show. Brian, I will start with you today. I think you are going to probably be the most positive person. We'll start in the realm of positivity. John Campea on his show called this the worst episode of The Mandalorian that's ever aired. Is he right? And what is your scale of 1 to 10 on this particular episode?
Well, I will say, first off, my scale is, I put this as a solid 7. It was still a enjoyable episode for me. It didn't feel like it had a huge amount of weight that perhaps it could have. But it still felt like Star Wars and new Star Wars to me. I felt like there was a lot here that we're learning about what's going on with the New Republic, and why it's not going to work when we hit the sequel trilogy. I think there's a lot pushing forward for the main narrative of the season, which is the unification of the Mandalorian people, and essentially, I think, an evolution of who they are going to be. But I get, like, I totally get why, some people have some reservations on it. Is it the worst episode of The Mandalorian? That's such an interesting and at the same time maybe pointless question. Like, I guess what I have to ask, I guess I can only offer my opinion, and you're all welcome to respond. But is like, are there other bad episodes of The Mandalorian? Is the worst episode, like the second worst episode, fantastic?
Right.
So
good point.
So, every series has bad episodes. And so I feel like there's a hunger right now, and you kind of see this with the MCU, you see this with Star Wars as well. There's a hunger to kind of dunk as hard as we can on these things. And this season seems to, for whatever, have really ignited that online. And honestly, in a lot of the geek culture sites I've seen some really weird criticisms that I go like, well, I don't want to invalidate it because it's someone's opinion, but I've seen IO9 say that the first episode had the worst dialogue they've ever heard, which is weird given
That's
that,
strange.
Like Harrison Ford literally said, you can write this shit, but you can't say it, to the original trilogy. There's a lot of people online that seem to be going like, what is the plot of this season? Which I go like, well, maybe you don't like the plot of this season, but it's very clear, like the Mandalorian, thread of like the Mandalorian people, the unification of them. I don't think that's a mystery, but there is definitely something, and I'm sure we'll get into it. There's definitely something that is splitting fans. There's something that people who were on board for the previous 2 seasons are feeling very iffy about, and so I don't want to invalidate those feelings, but sometimes I do wonder if people are a little harsher than they realize, or a little more judgmental. There's times in this season where I sat back and just looked at my wife and co-founder of Fanbase Press and was like, once again, as a Star Wars fan, I can't believe I'm seeing this on screen. I can't believe that like this is coming to me on a weekly basis. And it's just like, hey, here's an hour of Star Wars, and you're going to see, Mandalorians like, rock this town, or you're going to see an insane dogfight over, a pirate vessel, or so, a spectacle can't make up for story, but yeah, I guess I'm not as disheartened or depressed as some people seem out there.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely also to your point, there's this. I think that there is the Lucasfilm has become I'm going to use a sports analogy. Lucasfilm has become for many people the Yankees, right? Like it is, they are the pinnacle of the Yankees are literally called the evil empire, right? Because it's almost like they have all the money, they have all the talent that they want. And so they're the easiest target to dunk on. Like if I came out with a TV show right now, I have a shoestring budget. I'm trying to put things together as best I can. If you dunk on me, it'd be like dunking on the little guy. It'd be like you get no points for dunking on me, right? Like, right. But with Star Wars, I think it's a little bit different. We're dealing with different territory. So, and I think I do want to ask the question because I think it is an indicator of, if it's the worst episode of The Mandalorian we've seen, that does signal to us that something is different. And to me, it's more interesting to start to pick apart what's different as opposed to dunking. Like dunking is not that helpful because it's like, yeah, we'll dunk all day long. And then people will say, yeah, I agree with you. But if we can actually analyze what's kind of going on, it's a little bit more interesting and it's a little bit more nuanced. So before I move on
too, I think.
Yeah, so let's do this really quick. I'll go around the horn and we'll get, is it the worst episode of The Mandalorian? What'd you do it on a scale of 1 to 10? But I do want to get to, I'll circle back around to each of you because I want to know what you thought worked and what you thought didn't work as well. So before I do that, Vash, Dre, what do you think? Is this the worst episode of The Mandalorian? And what's your scale of 1 to 10 rating?
Yeah, I mean, to go with your analogy of the let's say the Yankees, right? The Yankees are spending so much money on their team that when they don't get to the World Series, kind of a big deal, right? It's like, whoa,
yes.
How did we not get to the big games here? This is kind of that, I think, and I think you can distill this kind of feeling down with this episode, I think, pretty good, because I was going back and forth in my mind like, well, what would I rank this as? Is it a 7? Is it an 8? Is it a 6? 6 was a little bit too low, but 7 maybe a little bit too high. But then I remembered it's kind of like your Yankees analogy, right? We expect this show to be, super, super good, and when it falls flat, it's kind of a big deal because it is, this amazing franchise, and obviously it's built itself up a reputation, and because of that, it's kind of difficult because it's like, is it an episode just in its, by itself in isolation, fully objective about it, right? Or is it like, what do you think of this episode of The Mandalorian? How it rates up against others? How do you do that, right? So, in that vein, I'm gonna have to go 6.5, which is a similar rating that I gave, I think, episode 3, if I'm not mistaken, of The Mandalorian, with this one. And the reason why is because, like those comments that I had for this show before, as I was seeing it all conveyed on screen, I was like, ooh, this is kind of interesting, but with episode 3, it was like, is this going to really play with normies, right? Is this going to be as accessible to the normies expecting a Mandalorian episode? In this episode, I felt the reverse, where it was like, is this going to play with Star Wars fans expecting a Mandalorian episode? And this kind of, I think we talked about it in the pregame a little bit, this kind of feels like a Clone Wars episode, which is cool, and it's very, very interesting, and I do kind of appreciate that, The Mandalorian is kind of getting, it's getting away from the nitty-gritty all the time of the underworld and stuff like that, and doing new things, exploring new places, right? That was one of the big criticisms of Book of Boba Fett, for example, right? Well, we're going to spend all our time on Tatooine, right? So to explore a completely new planet, completely new culture, and all that, kind of set up the galaxy as it exists at this time, in Star Wars is really, really interesting. But this episode, like you said, Jay, it's like, this is the last one until the penultimate episode.
Right.
This is a great episode to include in a show that has maybe 2 times or 3 times the amount of episodes in it, right? And it definitely wouldn't maybe necessarily position this so late in the season. And it's a kind of a big far cry from what we've seen from Mandalorian before, which I think is contributing to the sense of like, whoa, this is really bad. Even if you look at Dave Filoni's work, this isn't that outside the realm for him. So I think that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We got 3 super chats that I got to acknowledge really quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Hold on, let me scroll up. We'll start off with
Matthew
Mr. Matthew Murr.
Thank you so much. He's consistently a huge fan of OG55 and a contributor to OG55. So we appreciate you with that, Matthew. And he actually sent me some Twitter messages that I haven't gotten to because I've been too busy today. But I'll get back to you, Matthew. Drunk 3PO with I don't like Star Wars, but we love OG55. We love you, Drunk 3PO. We love you.
Yeah.
Very much.
And then we've got Joseph Michael with the Chapek avatar. Now that is a rarity that you don't see very often. I really hope Chapek firing Gina Carano didn't throw a wrench into the works in relation to the whole Mando Filoni verse.
We'll get into that.
We're gonna dive into that.
That's interacting with the season a bit.
It's an interesting piece of that. I also want to hear you guys' thoughts on if Chapek fired, if Chapek had anything to do with firing Gina Carano. Yeah. And we'll talk about that. So, OG, is it the worst episode of The Mandalorian? And what do you give it on a scale of 1 to 10?
Okay.
By the way, if you're in the chat, I want to know what you think too. So, in addition to what we got, is it the worst episode? And what's your scale of 1 to 10?
Okay, is it the worst episode? That's hard for me to answer because I don't honestly remember all the episodes that detailed to really know if this was the worst one per se. But I rate this one pretty low, just a little lower than what Vash gave it. I give it just an even 6, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing about my approach to this particular episode is I didn't watch it right away. So I was able to see all the fan kind of reaction to it on Twitter first, and I ended up watching the episode this morning. So it's kind of interesting kind of doing it in reverse, seeing all the fan base kind of argue and debate it for a few days and then go into the episode. So based on the feedback on Twitter, I was kind of going into this episode like, oh my God, this is going to be like a stinky diaper, right? Just total booty cheeks, right? Like the worst thing ever. And I didn't think that it was that bad, right? At the same time, though, I didn't think it was great either. I thought there was a lot of kind of campy stuff, like mostly with the Lizzo scenes. I wasn't like too happy with that stuff, mostly because look, she's a terrible actress. She really is. But that wasn't really my beef because Star Wars, hey, bad acting isn't something we're as Star Wars fans, we're necessarily like not used to, right? I mean, we had bad acting in the prequel too, and I love the prequels. But so the bad acting wasn't so much a thing. It was just more of like the aesthetics of the scene of the world. Looked a little on the cheap side with the aliens and what have you. I wasn't really digging the style. Now people say like Lizzo like took them out of it. I wouldn't recognize Lizzo if she was standing in front of me at Target. Okay, I had no idea who she was, like straight up. She didn't like take me out of it per se because of that. One thing that Star Wars has a real issue with, I think, is not properly utilizing talent. Right? Like they got for Force Awakens, perfect example. They got the martial artists for that movie, The Raid. I don't know if you guys ever saw The Raid, but they have some crazy martial arts in that movie. They got those guys to be in The Force Awakens. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be crazy. What are they going to play? Are they going to play like, like some Jedi, like badass Jedi doing all these martial artist moves? And all they did was stand in a hallway and argue with Han Solo in that movie. It was a waste of total talent, right?
You owe us credits. You can't run forever. Yeah, that whole thing. Yeah,
that whole thing. And they do this, and Star Wars kind of does this a lot, right? Lupita Nyong'o, I always massacre her name. They kind of wasted her too, making her basically like a CGI mocap character, right, with Maz Kanata. Same thing happened here with Christopher Lloyd. It was legendary actor, talented guy wasted on this role. Like you have Christopher Lloyd. Like, come on. Like, you know, surely he can do something a little bit. I don't know. I wasn't feeling that. There were some things in the episode I thought were really cute. I thought, like, obviously Grogu, he's adorable. How do you not love that guy? Like, when he jumped over the table and for the snack, I don't know. People probably thought that was horrible. I thought it was really adorable. I actually dug that. I also really dug the droid bar. I thought that was pretty badass. And I love. Yes, that was really cool. And there were a few droids in there that looked like DJ Rex from Batu. That was really cool.
Yeah.
I was digging that. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then also that weird, like, it was like a C-3PO, but it was like that really like metallic-y blue guy. It was like a C-3PO with like metallic-y blue. That looked really, really dope. So there were some good elements in this episode. I mean, look, yeah, I think the fan discourse is a little overboard with how bad it is, but I'm not going to go as far as to say I absolutely love the episode. You know, I thought it was okay. It's a 6, but I don't know. I think Mando will be fine at the end of the day. Here's the other thing too I want to bring up, and you guys touched upon it, was the amount of episodes are an issue. 8 episodes, you don't have that much time to tell this story, and you can't really have like filler or like episodes that don't really do a lot, or episodes that fall flat. Now, I'm a big fan of this show on NBC called The Blacklist, and it's been going on for years. It's like on season, like, I don't even know what, like 14 now or something crazy, 15. And each season has like maybe 15 or 20 episodes. Now, with that show, it kind of does what Mando does, where it has like the case, the investigation of the day, but it also has like a through line for the whole season, like this overall story, right? But when you have a season of like 15, 20 episodes, you can get away with an episode or 2 or even 3 that kind of fall short and kind of don't do anything. And that happens with that show a lot. But there's so many episodes that it's like, it's kind of forgivable. Okay, oh well. With Mando though, when you only have 8 episodes, right? And you're on episode 6, you're only 2 away from the finale, and it's a weaker episode, it hits a little harder. You don't have that much runway to make those mistakes. So that's a big issue here for this one. But yeah, overall, just to kind of wrap it up, I give it a 6.
Nice. Captain John D says the worst episode was the Dr. Pershing's trip to the Space Carnival. This was the second worst. So that's an opinion there too. And then also BJ Vincent has entered the chat. What's up, BJ Vincent? I will say this. And we'll get into the nuance of why I believe this is true. I think Mando season 1 and season 2 were top tier. Andor is the highest quality thing I've ever seen in Star Wars. And to me, the action and the coolness of The Mandalorian, from what I loved as a kid, were competing against the talent and the very intricate skill that was used in Andor. And I'm like, which one do I like better? The one with more action, or do I like the one with more skill? Like, I love both of them. This season for me is sort of a dip in the skill that is getting us into territory, which makes me go, if I'm in this territory, this is territory that I'm not familiar with, to Brian's point, with The Mandalorian. Is it? So when I say it's the worst episode, right? You've heard me say that some episodes were like a 6.5. To me, this episode was like a 5. But I'm comparing this to season 1 and 2, which literally had like the worst episode was like maybe a 7.5. I mean, like it was just hit after hit after hit after hit. So this is a comparison thing. Like this is not a 2 for me, right? Like the end of this episode is still a phenomenal ending to this episode. So I'm going to throw out a couple things, and we'll go around the horn and talk about some of the things that we thought worked or didn't work. The first thing I want to say, though, is that I thought that Bryce Dallas Howard's directing, I feel like this was a very unfair episode to ask Bryce Dallas Howard to direct, because I think that she is one of the best directors at using the volume for its full effect. A lot of times the volume, people complain about the volume because it looks like you've put characters in a small space, and that it's like, oh, now it feels like you're using the volume. But I would argue that this, and this is not just Bryce, but also the visual effects crew. When they get inside the little hyperloop, when they are walking through the city, it feels expansive. Like if you talk about using the volume effectively, like Bryce uses the volume incredibly effectively. So I did want to point that out, as I thought that was really effective. I thought that the fight at the end was really effective. I thought that the setup of the episode was really effective. And then you have this thing that is in the middle. There's this thing that happens in the middle, and that was where the awkwardness came out. And we keep seeing this show up in season 3. There is this, we know that we need to follow Din and Bo in the beginning, and we need to have them at the end. And in the middle, now they were still in the middle in this one, but in the middle is this weird side story that seems to detract, at least with the Dr. Pershing episode, Captain John D, at least with that episode, that had a relationship back to the overarching storyline of like, we had to deal with Dr. Pershing because he knew stuff. And so we needed to take him out of the equation. With this episode, I'm going like, I don't know how this has anything to do with anything that we're talking about in this season. And that showing up, as you guys have already pointed out very astutely, as Mr. Dre would say, that is so awkward to have happen in episode 6. If this had happened in episode 2, we might be like, okay, cool. It's like a side story. Like this is like a plot. Like it's going to filter back in somehow. But I mean, like this is not going to filter back in somehow. Like it's not going to happen. So I think that was just really awkward. I'm going to touch on a couple more points, and I want to hear you guys' thoughts about what was good and what was bad.
Sure.
I thought the intro scene was a little awkward because they tried to give that scene more depth than that scene needed. They tried to make it like a love connection. Like, dude, it's just, you're just taking over a ship. Like, just take it. Like, it's fine. We don't need that. Now, if Andor had done that, that would have been foreshadowed 3 episodes in advance, and you would have like understood why it was even happening. We didn't need that necessarily here. Whether or not Lizzo took you out of the episode, my problem with it is that I was okay with showcasing the comedians of the week. And I think I would have been okay if you would have put Sarah Silverman in place of what Lizzo was in, right? And there would have been this kind of running through line of like, here's some comedic actors who were putting in slightly dramatic roles. But I would feel the same way I felt about Lizzo if you put Taylor Swift in this role. It'd be like, it just is not like, I don't need to see the celebrity of the week. It starts to feel very holiday specialist, like bring in a cameo of the week. I'm okay with that if they're actually actors. Like Bill Burr, he's not even trying to do comedy. Like he's actually like a lived-in character who like matters to the story. This just felt like we can get some people to watch this if we put Lizzo in it, and people will talk about it on social media. And to me, it was like, okay, but that's not a good reason. Like, think of how many starving actors like who would have been fantastic in this role, but you're like, no, let's just go ahead and get like Lizzo in so that social media will talk about it. I don't need to see that in a Star Wars.
It was like what She-Hulk did with Megan Thee Stallion, basically. It was like
same thing.
Yeah,
it was the same thing.
It just feels kind of cheap when you do that. I can totally see what you're saying. I mean, I didn't mind Christopher Lloyd so much, bringing him in, because he's a fantastic actor, obviously legendary, but they just totally underutilized him. I mean, that was like, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the things, Dre? What are some of the things you liked, and what are some of the things that you struggled with?
Yeah, I mean, the struggle bus is definitely a little bit of what you were just saying right now, where, you got Lizzo in there, and I actually kind of like Jack Black in here. I thought he was like okay, like, okay, well, I got it. Like I know what he's doing, know what he's getting at, all that. But Lizzo was a very odd choice. Not even that great of an actress, to be honest with you. And it's like, why is she here? It's very kind of strange. Interesting, because when you walk into that kind of dining room that in which they had their first meeting, you can hear like a flute back there, which I guess is Lizzo's, one of her primary instruments. So that was a very kind of, okay, all right, I see we're laying it on pretty thick here. And then Baby Yoda jumps into her arms and stuff like that. So she's playing with that, and it's like, all right, this is This is weird. This is, is this like a wish list thing or something? Like it's all very, like, it just takes you out, right? If it's not actually, if it's a cameo that isn't maybe, this is not necessarily executed as effectively as it could be. And I thought that it gave me that kind of vibe. So we just talked about that, Jay, I think with the last episode, good cameos, bad cameos. It's kind of funny because they're right next to each other. I thought Jack Black was actually a good cameo, whereas Lizzo, maybe not as effective as she maybe possibly could be. Interesting because this does relate to the overarching narrative, but it's like a throwaway line almost. Bryant, maybe you can disagree with me on this, but the whole reason they're doing this is because, I guess, Plagieur 15, if I'm not mistaken, is saying we'll recognize Mandalore as a sovereign nation and all that. And it's like, okay, like, I appreciate that there's some kind of tie-in, but you really need to emphasize that because I think that was kind of missed, right? And especially, where this episode goes and so forth, that really needed to be hit hard. Like, hey, we're actually doing this for a reason, guys. Just trust us and enjoy the ride, kind of thing. Right. I don't think that was hit as effectively as it possibly could have been. There are stuff that I liked about this episode. It's interesting because I didn't see this myself, but some people were actually making connections to this kind of world that they're on and this kind of dome city to Epcot. It's really kind of interesting. I'll let Screen Crush actually explain this because I think this was interesting. I'm just going to play the audio because they feature video clips and we don't want to get demonetized. So here we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Religion and politics stuff. Now, when they first rolled up on the planet, I thought, oh, the Mandalorians built domed cities like the ones they have in their home world. But it turns out these were designed by an Imperial civil engineer to be a perfect model society. So I think that this is an homage to Epcot Center. When Walt Disney, the man, not the company, first conceived of the park, it was going to be a utopian city where people actually lived and worked. We see that Plaisir, Jack Black's character, has actually built these Epcot-like domes in a Disney-esque monorail. But people traveling around in tubes see.
And I guess it's also a reference to a Tenacious D song as well, which is the whole traveling in tubes bit, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, you have this kind of monorail or people mover like transportation service. You have this kind of dome city, which there were concepts for the Progress City or the experimental prototype community of tomorrow to actually be domed and so forth. I was like, wow, that's kind of a thing, and that kind of cool. If you're a Disney fan, didn't quite make that connection before, but it's like, okay, I can kind of see it. It kind of goes on this Attack of the Clones almost, film noir, this kind of mystery where it's like, ooh, we have this thing happening to these robots. By the way, very similar to iRobot, right? And how it's actually performed. And yeah, I mean, like that's kind of a cool side quest, but it's like it sits at home maybe in a Clone Wars episode and not necessarily a Mandalorian episode, right? And that's kind of like my back and forth, like, ooh, I kind of like where this is going, but then again, it's like, ooh, this is Mando. Will people appreciate this in the way that I think they intend? I'm not sure, and obviously, well, I guess we know now through all the stuff, right? The kind of space politics that are going on here, where you have the Article 9 of the Coruscant Peace Accords, right? That were referenced when they want to actually see the planet's military defenses. I thought that was kind of interesting because that's kind of lore setting up the state of the galaxy, as I'm sure Bryant will get into here, about what's going on and how untenable the New Republic actually is. You have the sovereign nation right here that could be an ally to the New Republic, but they've chosen to be a sovereign, and how that all plays out is very kind of interesting. And then that last fight I thought was really cool, Bo-Katan and her previous follower there. I thought that was a really cool exchange. And there's some lore bits in there too, like for example, this guy, he's not only a zealot, but he doesn't have a drop of Mandalorian blood in him. It's like, ooh, that's interesting because some people feel it's a race, some people feel it's a creed. We're kind of bringing that back. Some people have issues with how he ends up with the Darksaber and why it's right for Bo-Katan to actually hold it. I would have preferred a duel and not this, but again, when you have this kind of episode that you want to kind of put in here, like OG said, you only have so much space in which to do that. So if you say yes to one thing, you have to say no to something else. And I guess we don't get a conflict between Din Djarin or Bo-Katan, as was teased at the conclusion of season 2. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, I like aspects of this. The resistor bar, that's cool.
Yeah.
The mystery, that's cool, right? All that, but then there are some other things that didn't quite work out as effectively. By the way, Christopher Lloyd, that's a cool cameo. I just wish, I agree with you, OG, could have been utilized a little bit better.
Couple things I'm going to pick up on, then I'm going to throw it over to you, Bryant. First is, thank you, Slimer, for the super chat. Beam aboard the USS Titan or float away with the rest of the garbage. Sorry, Star Wars.
There were some times where it feels like a Star Trek episode, right? Like it's a little different.
And it's a good point. Some people are checking out of Star Wars, so Star Wars has got to kind of fix this, right? Like, I haven't checked out yet. I'm not checking out anytime soon. Andor season 2 is something I'm really looking forward to. But there's that. A couple things I want to just mention. We've talked about the droid bar a couple times. I thought for sure we were gonna get a "we don't serve your kind" here line.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how we didn't get that. I thought we were gonna get that. Right. So I thought we were gonna get that. The other thing,
didn't Mando say something like that? I thought he mentioned that like they don't serve our kind here or something. He made like a little joke, right?
He didn't say those words exactly, but he was kind of like, I feel like we're out of place or something along those lines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The other thing I want to do is I picked on Lizzo a little bit. But for me, Jack Black, and to quote Amine, how can you not like Jack Black? But I do love Jack Black, except I do think that Jack Black showed up to this role, not whoever this character was in this role. So I thought I had a little bit of a problem with that too. So I was picking on Lizzo because she, to me, was like a more surprising cameo. I kind of expect at this point to see some comedians show up as cameos, but to me, most of the comedians that have shown up, even look at Tim Meadows last week. Yes, it's Tim Meadows, but Tim Meadows was embracing the role of the Republic guy who's got too much on his plate. For me, this kind of felt like Jack Black. You could throw a guitar his way and he'd just start playing and he'd be normal Jack Black. It wasn't like he wasn't doing a whole lot more here. So my issues with Lizzo are also my issues with Jack Black. I didn't see a distinction between the two so much. Except that, like I said, I expect to see some of these actors who have been traditionally comedians. I'm not expecting to see musicians. Like, if all of a sudden John Mayer showed up, I'd be like, what is John Mayer doing here, right? It's the same thing, right? So, Bryant, tell us what you really liked about this episode and maybe some of the things that you struggled with as well.
I think you all have valid criticisms. I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective than I see others feeling, because I do feel like this episode does, as we noted, if you look at it structurally, it does push the plot forward. It's continuing the redemption of Bo-Katan and that parallel journey with Din. Getting sovereignty for Mandalore is going to be huge for uniting their people, as is getting the Darksaber back. These are things that she needs to do to become the person that the armorer said that she would be, that she is the person that actually can bring them together. And it's also interesting, I think, because it's really interesting to be able to watch this character have gone through things, Clone Wars, Rebels, and now here, and know how long this journey has been from her, losing her sister, losing the saber, losing her world, and she's clawing her way back up once more. The thing that I think helped, cause this to kind of fall flat for some people, is that I feel like while a lot of this is serious, and there is always, serious in the plot progression, and there is also always a place for goofiness and campiness in Star Wars, because it's got that in its DNA.
Yeah.
Some of this didn't feel, it wasn't just goofy. Some of it didn't feel 100% real, in the sense that it seemed like what I'm hearing is that some of these things that were written to touch on serious topics, like acquiring the sovereignty or say Jack Black. Something I had no issue with Jack Black. I thought the character was fun, but we are also looking at someone who's a former Imperial who has been put through this program and is now once again in a place of power, a place of privilege. And I don't know that we know exactly what to take away from that, because it was played very comedic and sort of fun and light with the relationship with Lizzo and stuff. But like, what are we saying here? Are we saying that this person is truly redeemed? Are we saying that this person is not, and that they committed certain crimes and were given a pass and now are once again in a position of power? I don't know that the show had an opinion on that as much as it did. It seemed to have with some of the Pershing stuff,
Interesting.
So I think that happened. I mean, I think that could also be said about Christopher Lloyd. I think it's so interesting to have a Count Dooku truther,
yeah.
I mean, and Count Dooku is he seems like a throwaway character in the prequels, but the more that they've added to that story, especially with things like Tales from the Jedi, you really get like, wow, this is a complex character with because he's speaking truth, even though he's flawed horribly. And the idea that there are still people that feel that way in the galaxy, that's some meaty stuff, And I think, I guess to sum all that up, what I think is happening here, and this is much of this is speculation, so I could completely be wrong. But my feel is I have a good sense for Filoni's, in my own opinion, I have a good sense for Filoni's writing. Favreau had the writing credit on this one.
Yeah,
and he has had a writing credit on a lot of them. I feel like Filoni was adding a lot of the things that, like, kind of reeling Favreau in many ways, adding a lot of things that we liked in seasons 1 and 2. And I think he's off shooting Ahsoka right now. And I think he's checking in occasionally. And I think Favreau's running the show, and I just think Favreau has a looser grasp of this. I feel like he doesn't have the same balance that Filoni seems to have for me when it comes to melding the goofy with the poetic and serious, I mean, Filoni comes up with stuff like the, Darth Maul's final scene with Obi-Wan, which is incredibly poignant and beautiful and purely Star Wars. But he also can do an entirely goofy episode, where droids are, on a mission and he leans into the humor. I just feel like Favreau doesn't have as quite a great grasp on that. And I don't know, there's part of me that also, and this, it might be unfair, but I'm going back to the MCU, which I'm a big fan of, but they sacrificed Iron Man 2 to make the MCU grow,
Yes.
like they went like, hey, there's this like 15%, 20% is Iron Man story. The rest we need to set up to build this universe. And that's what I kind of feel like is happening this season. I feel like all the things that are coming in, the New Republic characters, the what we're going to see, I think, become the First Order, maybe even Bo-Katan, because she's essentially leading this series for this season. Din's sort of like a co-star in his own series. It all feels like this is to expand to like Skeleton Crew, Ahsoka, these other animated series, or not animated series, live action series that are all going to be set in sort of the pre-sequel era. And we're about to see that kind of blossom or grow. And unfortunately, like, this show at this point has to do some heavy lifting, to set those things up so they don't just feel, like they come out of nowhere. The idea, I think, is just like with the animated series and what we've seen before, is like, the idea is to continue on. They wanted you to do that with Book of Boba Fett, which I think again was a Favreau run deal, where there's a lot of good ideas, but it's like he gets to the interesting stuff and he kind of like goes I don't know. It's not that he goes the opposite way, but he doesn't dig as deep as I personally would like. Some of this stuff could be a little bigger, and even the good parts. I'll end with even the good parts. I could be critical of to a certain degree. Like the end fight is fantastic. It is a great moment. The character of Bo-Katan and Katie Sackhoff, I think, are just adding lifeblood to the series. but we're repeating an amazing scene we already saw in Rebels. You know, we've seen this scene, and I don't know that we added a ton to it. And the one thing that I would really like is like that fight was cool, but it should have been rougher. You know, I mean, I want to see Bo-Katan kick ass. She did. It was I thought it was really cool to see her with the dark saber when she saves Din, and she's literally like rolling around, cutting things off. You know, they've got her theme going, and we've seen this character in other series, and even her first episode in the Mandalorian season 2. She can sing on screen. You know, like this is somebody who just brings that Star Wars kick-ass heroic energy. And so it felt a little muted to me. It wasn't bad. It sets up a great thing, but it's like, you know, I think you said, Jay, or Dre as well. We have high expectations for this show, you know?
Yeah.
So I can't fault anyone for being like, this didn't meet my expectations. I just don't, I would agree with what also was said, is that I don't think it's as bad as it's being made out to be online, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's fair. I think it's totally fair. Any other points you guys want to make about what you liked about this episode or what didn't quite work for you? Or do you guys want to move on? Because, and by the way, brilliant thoughts on there, Brian. I love that.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the story threads, and I pointed this out in what is it, episode 3, where it's like, yeah, it goes off and does kind of its own thing and leaves you know, the kind of the main plot, right, with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin to the side for a little bit. But it's so important to just like set that stuff up, right, and to kind of give a foundation for the state of the galaxy right now, so you can build from it later. And I do appreciate that. It's just, you know, as Brian pointed out, and I think that's 100% correct. Jon Favreau isn't the best at doing that sometimes, as we have seen with Iron Man 2, right? Where it's like you gotta plant the seeds, but also present a really great feast at the end there, and it's just it doesn't quite coalesce. And I'm hearing some really great things about Ahsoka, like amazing things about Ahsoka, and I'm hoping it's a return to form, not just I mean, for the entire Mandoverse itself, right? Because it's kind of been a little bumpy as of late. But it's a shame that this season couldn't be, I think, as good as it could be.
Well, you know, it's interesting too. You guys bring up some great points about Filoni. Like he's a master at that. He'll plant these seeds, and there's a payoff at the end. Like I remember all the criticisms about the space whales in Rebels on that one episode when those were featured. People were like, "What is he doing? This is stupid," you know. And people were calling it filler and the whole thing. I remember all of the arguing on Twitter and what have you. But then and then the space whales really paid off at the very end. Like they mattered and it made sense, right? Like Filoni's really good at doing that. And Brian, to your point, like I'm a huge Jon Favreau fan, massive Jon Favreau fan. I love Chef. That was a great, you know.
Yeah,
he's
fantastic.
He's fantastic. But I think you bring up a fantastic point, Brian, where it's like, yeah, he's a great director. He knows his stuff. But is he necessarily the best Star Wars guy? And maybe not. Maybe not.
Book of Boba Fett would definitely raise his eyebrows.
He has a lot of cachet right now, and that's always a question. I think when someone gets that creative power in a franchise like this, is it going to benefit the franchise, or is the loosening of restrictions, of limitations, is that going to reveal the opposite, you know, that it's going to become less because you're not fighting against those limitations?
And it could be that the pair is just spread too thin right now. You know,
Sure.
maybe you know, 3 shows, you know, maybe a little bit too much. Maybe you gotta focus and hone in with the pair together because they might offset each other's weaknesses. Well, that's possible too.
It's very true. Very true.
And this is a perfect segue into my next question, because I want to explore this idea that season 1 and 2 feel like something different than season 3 feels like, and I want to talk about that. I do want to give a shout out really quickly. I saw that Jonas J. Campbell was in the chat earlier, so what's up to Jonas if he's still there? And the Rogue Attraction Tom has dropped into the chat as well. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those 2 gentlemen. with season 3, I should say, it feels almost like the entire intent of the Mandalorian has changed from season 1 or season 2. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. Brian, you kind of alluded to that as some of the storytelling, as you talked about difference between Filoni and Favreau. And then OG, you also had a video from Josh over at
Den of Nerds.
Den of Nerds and Nerd Vengers Tower over there.
Yes.
So maybe play some of that and we'll react to that. And then I've got some thoughts I want to share about that as well.
Okay, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
This is actually from the episode right here. If you translate the Arabesh, so it's they're having a little bit of fun, which is very kind of interesting because it's a great distillation of the entire episode probably. Here we go. So this is Den of Nerds right here, talking about what might actually be going on with this season, and it's kind of fascinating to hear. Because it sounds very similar to what we've heard before, but hey, Den of Nerds swears by the guy he's actually hearing this from, so we'll see.
So first off, I just want to say this is literally one of the most reliable people that I talk to behind the scenes. An incredible source that has gifted me some of the biggest W's I've ever had while covering the nerdy news. So now with that out of the way, I'm going to sort of share the gist of the conversation that I had with this person, which explains all of the crazy details that are still like, what? And then in the back half of this video, I'm going to speculate about what other things I think are going on and just like how screwed Star Wars actually is, because it's even worse than I thought. So the first thing that happened was me talking to this source and them basically saying that they believed Jon Favreau does not give a shit about the writing anymore. And I was like, what? There's no way that's true. How could that actually be what's happening? The source then clarified that's 100% true. They know it for a fact, which really shocked me. This was like truly mind-blowing information. And so then I started talking about all these rumors that I had been hearing, and I hear these rumors all the time when I'm on stream, when I'm doing Nerd Theory, or just in the comment section of videos or on Twitter. A lot of people have been bringing up the fact that there's this big rumor that Kathleen Kennedy was interfering with the Mandalorian, with the Book of Boba Fett, and it pissed Jon Favreau off so badly that he was ready to quit. He was ready to walk away from Lucasfilm completely. Now, look, the truth is, I've been hearing this rumor for a long time, and I haven't heard it come from anybody that I consider to be reliable, so I thought this was just more BS. You know, the kind of stories that come from masked people that have been proven over and over again and not really know what they're talking about, or, you know, the kind of people that make future Star Wars content. I basically thought it was bullshit. It smelled like bullshit.
Star Wars Explained, Star Wars Theory, Doomcock, that's what he's talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Real quick, I just want to share some news that Alia is sharing with us right now, which actually ties into what we're saying. She's hearing from, there's a rumor right now per Jeff Snyder, who's in Hollywood. He's an insider, very reliable in the past, is saying that Dave Filoni is getting his own Star Wars movie that's going to be announced tomorrow at Celebration.
Yes.
And it says here, and furthermore, Lucasfilm is trying to codify the Star Wars universe around the worlds that Filoni and Jon Favreau have created, which is why other movies. And then last part here, and shows are being killed. Filoni equals new Lucas. So I'm sorry to interject, but that does play into what we're talking about here. And also plays into the whole idea that Filoni has been distracted, absolutely distracted. He's working on a movie, supposedly, per Jeff Snyder. So that's very, very interesting.
Very, very interesting. We'll continue real fast.
We'll come back to that one.
Oh, yeah. We're going to stick a pin in that for sure.
It just seemed like it was coming from bullshit places, and alas, it is actually true. My source told me this story was actually real, including the part where Jon Favreau almost walked away. So according to this person, this all really has to do with the Book of Boba Fett, and it's really the idea that Disney and Kathleen Kennedy wanted to take the show, The Mandalorian, and spin it out into its own universe. My source basically told me that Jon Favreau was forced into making the Book of Boba Fett rather than just the next season of The Mandalorian, and also that it was Kathleen Kennedy that made the Book of Boba Fett tie so much into The Mandalorian. Now, things are already on shaky ground for reasons I'm going to get into in just a minute here, but it appears that the reception of the Book of Boba Fett was something that Jon Favreau took pretty hard. Because as you know, that show was really not looked at that fondly, and the 2 Mandalorian episodes that are just in that show, although they are awesome, did really not go over well with most fans. So just so we're all on the same page, the story that I was told was this idea of expanding The Mandalorian into its own cinematic universe was a Disney edict, and so was the Book of Boba Fett. Tying it so closely to The Mandalorian was apparently also Kathy's idea. But I think the real thing that set all of this off is indeed the drama with Pedro Pascal. And I know, even saying that, some of you guys are going to be like freaking out. Some of you are going to be so triggered by that. But I was told again that that was real, that Grace Randolph was right when she talked about it. And I don't think you have to be friggin' Doogie Howser level genius. You don't have to be Sherlock freaking Holmes to figure out what's going on here. They are obviously shifting The Mandalorian to be about Bo-Katan. And so to reiterate what the reports were about Pedro Pascal during season 2, it was said that he very badly wanted more time with his helmet off. Things were already getting tense between Jon Favreau and Pedro Pascal because of this, but apparently it exploded to a certain level on the set of season 2 to where Pedro Pascal walked off and did not return to the show until much later, just to film some few more scenes and to do some ADR. And so the reason that the entire Mandalorian story is so disjointed now is because they made changes to season 2. They quickly made the Book of Boba Fett with putting in 2 important episodes for the Mandalorian after they had decided what their course of action was going to be from here with regards to Pedro Pascal. Pedro Pascal was not present at all during principal photography when they were actually shooting the show, and his role has been very much reduced to where he just comes in and he does voice over work. On top of that, Gina,
real quick, Trey.
Yeah.
Alia is saying, also from Jeff Snyder, he revealed in his podcast right now, quote, Jeff Snyder just said on his podcast that Pedro Pascal had a blow up with Disney crew and could leave after the season. With that's exactly what
we heard just now, right?
Just now from Den of Nerds. So it seems like there are, at least Josh's source, assuming Josh's source isn't Jeff Snyder, Josh's source and Jeff Snyder, they're both saying there's issues with Pedro and maybe he'll leave it. And that might explain a lot of what we're seeing here on screen.
By the way, so, Captain John D, great finds Alia. Yeah, that, by the way, is constant.
Yes.
By the way, if you know Alia, she is fantastic at digging up every single thing that could necessarily interact with the worlds of Disney. So amazing, constant. I don't know, scavenging by Alia.
She's a rock star,
Ray, right? She's just getting all that info from all these crazy places. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, wow, there's a lot to chew on. We're getting a lot over the wire right now with this stuff, but it's pretty wild.
One last note here. I think this is the last thing that might be interacting with The Mandalorian season 3.
Sure.
Here we go. There we go.
Carano, who Jon Favreau was building an entire spin-off show around, was unceremoniously fired away from Disney by Lucasfilm. And now The Mandalorian season 3 is injecting elements of the Rangers of the New Republic show that they were going to do as a spin-off into this main show.
I think that's...
And so The Mandalorian has not been the same since season 2.
I think that's part of what we're seeing here, right? It's like, why are we going into New Republic stuff in a way that would feel at home with Rangers of the New Republic and feels kind of off for Mandalorian? Well, I think that is also contributing to what is going on here outside of the rumors and speculation going on behind the scenes regarding the production of this show and with Lucasfilm itself.
Yeah. No, this is interesting, and I don't know. I'm a little frustrated because it does all seem sort of what's the word for it? Scrambly. The best way I can put it. And Lucasfilm has this issue, and I don't know. As a Star Wars fan, I just want things to be run a little bit tighter than we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of like, okay, so we canceled the Rangers show, so now we're going to take some of that and throw it into Mando, and then now this thing is canceled, and now we're bringing it's just too messy, and it creates a problem with the product.
It's sloppy.
It's sloppy. It's very, very sloppy. There's not a whole lot of planning, and when there is planning, that plan is canceled, and some new plan is interjected, and it's all over the place. So.
The one area I was going to take this to was this all has a forward-facing, audience-facing conclusion, and this is where I was going to go with it, because the behind-the-scenes stuff is not stuff that it's a lot of it's speculation, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around it. But what I can wrap my head around is that when we got season 1 and season 2. There was a major difference in terms of the philosophical approach to the show. So you mentioned this earlier, Dre, and actually no, OG, you mentioned it too with the Blacklist. But this was a show that was essentially set out to be a Western, clearly a Western in Star Wars. That Western was going to be fairly episodic with some through lines of serial storytelling. Right. What that means is that we are going to be able to see the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, visit different worlds and be able to interact with different cultures, solve problems with those cultures, and then go to another world and have that be different. Now, there was a through line, so I'm not pretending there wasn't a through line, just like there is in most episodic shows. There's a little bit of a through line, but that was the nature of the show. He was mostly going to our outer world planets. Now, this season's taking us to Coruscant and taking us to some of the politics that exist in the core of Star Wars, in the core worlds, as opposed to what's on the outer rim. So even from and it makes sense, by the way, if you're running out of time with Pedro Pascal, that you'd want to infuse the Mandalorian's popularity into other channels. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
But I think that one of the issues that I have with the show is this is not the show I was sold in seasons 1 and 2. But it still has the Mandalorian title, and it's still taking place with Din Djarin. I mean, Grogu is like, in this episode, he was barely even a side character, and I have no clue why he got knighted. That seemed to be just completely bonkers. This complaint is coming from a place of saying like, oh, this is actually a different thing than seasons 1 and 2 were. And I think it's important to call it out, to say, actually, we're in different territory at this point in time. We're not playing with the same set of cards that we thought we were playing with in the earlier episodes. And I do think it makes sense that they wanted to spin off all these other shows. What Filoni's really good at, Filoni's amazing at this, by the way, is telling serial stories that fill gaps. And they just built that around Filoni. They're like, we're gonna have a 5-part series on Princess Leia or Padme Amidala. Send it. We're gonna have a 5-part series on Ahsoka dealing with this problem. Send it. Right. So this feels, to Brian's point, this feels much more like what you would see from Filoni. We're gonna work in some other things, and we're gonna have this little serial story over here and this little serial story over here. But it doesn't feel like what we were getting from more of what I thought Favreau was doing with the first 2 seasons. So all of this background feels like, from a storytelling standpoint, we're getting something different, and this background actually makes sense given that context.
No, 100%. All the stuff going on, the shows that were canceled, like Rangers and what have you, the issues with Pedro Pascal, and all this like behind the scenes stuff is now affecting the front facing, the audience facing product. And it's a different show, and it's being forced into being a different show because of all these outside or behind the scenes kind of elements. Go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I know Brian is like itching to get into this conversation. He's been dying to, so I want to pass over to him just for a second because I think he might have a contrarian viewpoint than we might have. Go ahead.
I don't know that I don't know that I'm completely as contrarian as you might think. If I had to say anything, I have a heavy bit of skepticism regarding any Kathleen Kennedy rumors, because people have been
Yeah.
projecting this war between Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and Kathleen Kennedy for a long time, because I think it fulfills their wishes. There might be some tension, and what would make sense to me is if, you know, like when we look at it, as Jay was saying, when we look at season 1 of The Mandalorian, it does feel like that very, very strong, very solid, but very isolated story. You know, it wasn't dipping into major characters or anything. Season 2 definitely changed that. It was almost like a cameo season. Here's Boba Fett. Here's I'm forgetting the character's name, Ahsoka, but even what's his name?
Skywalker.
Timothy Oliphant. I'm forgetting.
Oh, he's amazing.
He was the character in the novels, and they basically were like, oh, wait, let's touch all these areas of the universe, but it was still working for most people. Some people were a little critical of it. And I think where I see like the turning point that might be the explaining some of this tension. It's hard for me to imagine Jon Favreau being forced to do Book of Boba Fett. It seems like such a weird thing. It seems like he would would only do that if he wanted to. Right. But what does feel somewhat artificial is it feels like the end of the Mandalorian story happened at the end of season 2. Like the perfect ending was to return Grogu to who he had to be returned to have the Mandalorian or Din Djarin be so connected to that character that he removes his helmet and goes against his own creed to have a moment of honest intimacy with this son, or this child of his, and then for it to have that painful separation. And I do feel like what does feel true is it feels like whether it was Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, Disney, someone was like, hey, Mandalorian can't end. Like, I know that was a great ending, but Mandalorian can't end. And I think, honestly, maybe it should have and they should have, it's not like the characters have to go away. I think I said this to you on Twitter, Jay. It's not like the characters have to end, but maybe we should be more okay with, sort of like what they're doing with things like Andor. Andor has a definitive ending. It had benefits from having more episodes than The Mandalorian per season. But maybe that would be more beneficial. And what I do think is happening is too late. Even if they've made the decision yet, too late have they made a decision about who is, to use an example, who's the Kevin Feige of Star Wars? Who has the vision and who is connecting the overall story that we're going to tell? Because the sequel movies I tend to like, but it's clear that they kind of like said, hey, what do you want to do? It wasn't like, hey, this is the story we're telling. Do you want to collaborate on it? It was very much like, what do you want to, do in the sandbox? And I think that is maybe, as much as we hear stories of frustration from the MCU of like, oh, I wanted to do this, but they told me I had to put this scene in or whatever. In general, I feel like it works in a lot of ways because at least for 30 plus films, it built on itself really well. Things felt connected. And Filoni has done that with the animated series. So I don't know why it has taken them so long to kind of bring him into that role. It does feel like that's what they're trying to do now. And the false starts that they've had with some of the movie cinematic universe, they had movies out there, but it's not what they had hoped for. I think that they see a potential with the TV series to do that with all these announcements. And that can become movies. I mean, Filoni has already indicated in an interview that like pretty much what we're going to see is like these series go apart and then have like almost like an Avengers type event where all these characters come together for something big. I think we all know what it is. We're going to a place where we see Thrawn become the main villain. We're going to see how that affects everything. Our Rebels characters are going to come in and be really, really important. So I think Ahsoka is going to essentially be that series will be the heart of this new universe. And to your point, Jay, the benefit of this, if it's done right, I think what they want Filoni to do is come in and fix what didn't work for the sequels. I mean, he's going to come in and explain how did we get here? why was Luke like this? Where,
Right.
what pulled these people away? What made Leia walk away? And some of this stuff's already in the novels. There's some great material where like there's a scene in, I think it's Bloodlines where where they get the political enemies of Leia get the info that Vader was her father, that Vader is Anakin Skywalker. And they like release it to essentially like besmirch her power and appearance. And Ben Solo didn't know this apparently at the time, is and so that you get like just the trauma of stuff like that not being present in the sequel films. I think it was a mistake to a certain degree, and it could be fixed here. There could be. I don't think they're going to necessarily go like, hey, let's have a Luke Skywalker Leia series, but they're going to fill in some of these gaps and make us go, oh, now when I watch the sequels, I'm thinking about this, and this, the same way we do that with Clone Wars and the prequels.
Brian, you bring up some incredible points here. When you said that like the end of the finale of Mando season 2 was kind of perfect, I completely agree with you, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Endgame. Right? Because like Endgame was kind of like the perfect cap off to the MCU, and they couldn't help themselves. They had to keep going with the MCU, and now we're seeing the wheels are kind of falling off a little bit for the MCU, right? Where if it ended at Endgame, that would have been the perfect kind of finale for that whole cinematic universe. And maybe they could have done something new starting after Endgame, but they should have ended this particular MCU maybe at Endgame. Same thing happened with Mando, is like that was kind of like the perfect ending to that story with Din and Grogu, right? But they didn't. They couldn't help themselves, so they kept going. And I'm kind of worried too, because I mean, I remember hearing, I think it was like a few weeks ago, that Jon Favreau was saying that they don't really have like any set amount of seasons for The Mandalorian. They're just going to keep going. That kind of tells me there's no real there's no real battle plan. Like it's basically like, as long as you keep watching, we'll keep making it. That worries me a little bit. Like some of the greatest shows, for example, Breaking Bad, right? The showrunner for that, I forgot his name. I do apologize, but he said he stated many times he only wanted the show to go so many seasons. He wanted that proper ending. He wanted a tight show all the way through, and it paid off big time. I'm worried with Mando. It's so open-ended. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, what I'm saying? And it can kind of lose its way a little bit. And we're already kind of seeing that. And that worries me quite a bit.
It's interesting because this is kind of, I think, Brian, to your point, I think this kind of plays to what Dan and Nerds was just speaking about, where it's like, oh, we have a sequel trilogy and we've themed and done a whole bunch of stuff with it, but it wasn't as received as well as we had hoped, right? Can we use The Mandalorian to fix it? Right, in a similar way that Dave Filoni used the Clone Wars to kind of fix the prequels and have people look at that differently. So to his point, it's like, ooh, that's something that Disney might do, right? And to OG's point, this is kind of when the behind the scenes starts affecting the what we see on screen, let's say, and It seems like they've been given a directive. You don't have to worry about making great content. We just need content for viewers for Disney Plus, right? It's like it's like one of those things, and it's like that's not a good route to go. A deluge of content doesn't make up for the lack of content. Let's say for the sequel trilogy, but then they keep changing the plan. Now it's we were going to hit certain story beats in the Rangers of the New Republic. We obviously can't do that show, so we have to do it here. But then we're using like the same kind of format and structure and of the Mandalorian to do that. So we can't expand how many episodes that we actually have to actually tell these stories. We can't or make that transition, as you said, Jay, from a Western to something that's a little bit bigger. We had to keep it 8 episodes, I guess, and 30 minutes a piece, and it's just not quite working, and you're getting people that are like, you know what, I'm out. Just recently, some of the streaming numbers actually came out for the Mandalorian season 3 premiere. This is going off of the Samba TV numbers, but they say here, although its viewership exceeded the recent Andor by close to 50%, it still trailed behind Obi-Wan Kenobi and The Book of Boba Fett premieres by 28% and 2% respectively, while also falling short of Marvel Studios' Loki premiere by 35%. And it says, last paragraph here, with The Mandalorian Season 3 failing to live up to past highs, one has to wonder whether some of the sense of Star Wars fatigue, if that's even real, is beginning to settle in. And that's the kind of worrisome part, is this season making people just say, you know what, I'm out. It's just gone off the rails. This is too complex, too complicated. This doesn't necessarily engross me in this story like previous seasons have. And now it's like, I'm not going to give Ahsoka a look at. I'm not going to give some of these other things a look because you've lost me. And I worry about that audience drop off because of what we're seeing here. That could be a variety of factors in place.
Yeah.
Well, it makes everything harder for where they're going. I mean, because if we believe that is the case, then what they're trying to do with continuing The Mandalorian is I think basically there was probably an executive decision of like, hey, this is the most popular Star Wars series we have. This is the place to bring the audience to more Star Wars series. Yeah. But this third season that is sort of being crafted to launch into that, it's going to shed viewers if it's received this way, like because they're sensing that some of this stuff is a little forced, and it just makes whatever the next series is. I don't know if Ahsoka's the next one that releases, but I feel like that's the one that either it's making Dave Filoni's job harder. It's like Dave Filoni, not only do you have to be good, you have to knock it out of the park, because you're going to have to make people go, hey, have you watched Ahsoka? I guess one benefit for them is that Andor season 2 should be highly anticipated, but that doesn't tie into this time period. And this is the time period that they're trying to like get going and get popular, so they can spread into multiple titles. And so if Mandalorian doesn't bring the audience there, Ahsoka really has to be amazing, I guess.
Yeah. It really has a lot on its shoulders, I think, more than people anticipated before The Mandalorian Season 3 actually took place. Ali Aloha, we have Nielsen, Week 1, 823 million minutes watched, and Week 2, 889 million minutes watched. Good news in the overall top 10. Bad news, should be over 1 billion minutes with 17 and 18 episodes total. Yeah, that's correct. So you want to... because there's more of a repository of content, some people are actually going to go back and rewatch the seasons, let's say, to catch up, and that's where you're getting some of those early spikes there. But again, though, I mean, it's you're still looking at a kind of a trail off when you should be this way, and that is what is really concerning. And I guess we got to talk about the bantha in the room, as Jack likes to say, right?
Okay.
Kathleen Kennedy. This has been brought before, obviously. There has been this kind of, like, I agree with you, Bryant, there has been this projected war, let's say, against Kathleen Kennedy. And I get that. I understand that. And
let's be honest, Kathleen Kennedy... videos are big business, right? I mean,
they get lots of hits.
Yeah.
They get the hits. And I don't necessarily agree with all their takes. I was a person, let's say, back when The Last Jedi came out, and I was like, ooh, this is not good. Gotta have a change of direction here fast. But I was willing, and I think when Solo came out, that kind of hardened my position, but I was willing to give it a pass when Mandalorian actually came out and was doing actually quite well, season 2, obviously, and all that. It was like, ooh, okay, there's a change of direction here that I think could work. But I think now that we're hearing, again, more production troubles, even if they are just rumors, of The Mandalorian specifically itself, with the creators of the show, we've obviously seen that kind of, that these kind of production problems actually affect what's on screen. Rogue One, for example, Solo is probably the most notorious example, but also, like you said, Bryant, how everybody was just kind of like, hey, what do you want to do? Here you go. Here's the sandbox. And it kind of destroyed the sandbox in a way because of that kind of mentality. Now we're having shows like Andor, for example, come out that are really, really good, yet nobody watches them. Is that because of what has been released, let's say? I think it's time. I think it's time to maybe start that conversation again of, do we move on from Kathleen Kennedy? Because we're just seeing this all over again. I've talked about how relationships regarding talent in Hollywood have been burned. Now we're hearing this kind of Karen McCarthy lawsuit, right, for The Acolyte. This is bad here. I think we're in a bad way, and that lawsuit does signal, hey, even if you do come on what some call a sinking ship, you might not even be paid for your services. Now that's an issue, because it's a signal out in Hollywood that Lucasfilm isn't necessarily creator friendly, which has been which us as fans have seen for a little while now. It's just getting to a point where it's like, do the shedding of baggage, let's say, and maybe a new direction from a creative from a position, a new studio head, would that benefit Star Wars or any other products that Lucasfilm actually puts out?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, the creator behind Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan.
That's it. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
An amazing storyteller, like phenomenal, top tier. And by the way, was not just lucky, did it again when he released Better Call Saul, which was just phenomenal. Really quickly, before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to point out that I think Bryant has done an amazing job of talking about Dave Filoni in a way that I go, yes, that resonates with me a lot. I feel a lot of the same things that you expressed, Bryant. And so if Filoni is the next guy, if Filoni is the next Lucas, right? The one comment I have about Lucas, I also have about Filoni, and that is they are dreamers and librarians and world builders before they are storytellers. And so I hope this would be so cool if they can do something that puts like a Tony Gilroy like right next to Filoni, so that when Filoni has his dreams and his thing, we go, can we put Tony Gilroy on this as well, just to get that awesome storytelling in there? Right. I think that would be like my ideal situation, because what it's sounding like to me is, if the rumor is coming out that Filoni is the new Lucas, what that kind of means to me is that Favreau said no, because I don't think they'd offer it to Filoni before they offered it to Favreau. Favreau's got a better resume. He's got movies in his back pocket that Filoni does not have. It would be shocking to me if they just said, we're just going to move to Filoni without at least considering Favreau as a part of that equation. Now, I think
it might be
Favreau,
a co-thing, though. It might be like a Favreau, right, and Filoni team up. Like DC with Gunn and Peter.
Absolutely. It could be something just like that, but I have a feeling that the reason why they'd highlight Filoni above Favreau is because Favreau probably told them, I don't want my entire world to be Star Wars. I want to do some other things as well. And so I think it'd be cool if they kind of both team up a little bit. I'm going to get on to question 3 just in a minute here, but let's pick up this super chat from Captain John D. I think we got to have the John D drop, by the way.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely do.
You got to do it.
You read my mind.
I love it. Every time I love that. That's so cool. So Kevin John D says, as much as we like to rip Disney Star Wars, there's always hope that what's next will be great thanks to the potential of the universe George created. Excited for Mando Season 4, Jedi Survivor, Ahsoka, and Skeleton Crew. Great breakdown, guys. Thank you so much, Captain John D, because I'm also excited about all of those things. I think this will be I think that, look, every time you have a period of trouble, every time you have a period that is not working out so well, at some point in time, if people persevere, there will be a time of excess again. And so I think we'll get back to it if we can just persevere through this moment that we're in now, which is not a terrible moment, by the way, just a very uncomfortable. We're not sure where things are going. We see more cancellations than we see successes. It's just we're at a little bit of a weird spot.
Well, and to kind of an analogy, or maybe not an analogy, but an example of this would be even Disney animation. I mean, they were in a real drought up until The Little Mermaid. Absolutely. in that 80, the early 80s to mid 80s. And sometimes you need to kind of hit rock bottom to really shoot for the moon, right? And we might be seeing that here, right? Where it's like, okay, we're kind of hitting a little bit of a drought here with Star Wars, Lucasfilm, but there might be some of the best Star Wars coming up because of it. We're gonna rise from it. So there's always hope. Hey, there's nothing more Star Warsy than hope, right? So.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and it's important to keep in mind too, because I don't know what will happen with Kennedy, and I don't know how, what the truth is of the conflict inside. But I think very often when we're out there, when people are making these videos, they love to focus on what they don't like and then ignore that she greenlit everything that they loved. She greenlit Andor, she greenlit Rogue One, she greenlit Mandalorian season 1 and 2. I mean, you got, if we give full acknowledgement, there's a lot that we love that is working too. I don't know that it looks great from the outside right now with these canceled projects. So that could lead to a seat change. But I would also add that I don't know if being the new George Lucas means that Filoni is taking that seat. I think the person who's running or steering the universe doesn't necessarily need to be the head of Lucasfilm. So
right.
It would almost be better if they're not.
Yeah,
right.
That's interesting.
I do have to point this out too, is that over the last, this started pre-pandemic, but it really came out during the pandemic, because the pandemic had multiple reaches into multiple industries that we're still feeling today. One of those reaches was the sudden and very impactful nature of what happened with streaming, because we used to have a very solid system of how things were going to be released, how they were going to be developed, how they're going to be released. What the pandemic did was it sped forward that system at a rate that the system was not ready for. What am I talking about? People said people aren't going to the movies, they're staying at home. All of our content is, let's call it lackluster, and it's now difficult to make. So greenlight as many things for streaming as you possibly can, because the streaming wars are now here. The streaming wars do not have the best business model comparative to the previous business models in terms of revenue generation. Right. So the whole industry went into a situation where it was like, Pixar has not thrived in this environment. Disney has not thrived in this environment. Marvel has not thrived in this environment. Star Wars has not thrived. DC has not thrived in this environment. We're not seeing, this is not a Star Wars problem. This is an industry-wide problem that the industry doesn't know how to deal with.
Right.
And so we just need to keep that in mind as well. Like, we need to get through some of these hardships to be able to see some of the light at the end of the tunnel as well.
It's like the layoffs, right? There's a narrative out there like Disney's laying 7,000 people off, and that's absolutely true. But people seem to also leave out the fact that so is Amazon, so is this company and that company and this company and that company. It's not like necessarily just a Disney, like Disney, oh man, Disney really fucked up. They're the only ones having to lay anybody off. No, not really. Like, just about every company is doing that, and it's... Yeah, I see what you're saying, Jay. It's not just a Lucasfilm issue. It's clearly across the board, even like DC and what have you.
Yeah, and some of these companies, by the way, have ideas for how to get themselves out of these problems. We saw Iger this week on the shareholder call say, "I'd like to hire 13,000 more people and invest 17 billion over in WDW." So there's visions for how to get out of this glut of problem that we find ourselves in. James Gunn has so look at James Gunn. James Gunn is sitting on massive problems, just waiting for his movies to come out. But in the meantime, he's got to sit and see just loss after loss after loss. Hopefully he'll get a pseudo win with The Flash, but it doesn't look like he's going to get any other wins. It looks like there's going to be some pretty bad losses in his future. So we have to kind of, again, as audiences and as fans, coming out of a time where we were all pretty depressed by the pandemic. Some of us lost family. Some of us have had our lives changed by the pandemic. We're sitting here going, I'd really like to escape to things. And all that you're giving me is these really up and down projects, which I can never predict. And then what do human beings struggle with? Chaos. And we just still find ourselves in a realm of chaos, and we've got to ride it out. And there's not a lot we can do about it.
So Jay, dare I say, are we in a fandemic? No, just kidding.
Pandemic to fandemic. It's just cross borders right there. So here's how we'll end the show. Let's talk about this really odd thing that happened in this show, which I think all of us admit is an odd thing, whether or not we liked the episode that we just saw, and we're all in differing degrees of that. It's weird to get this episode as episode 6.
Right.
It's a little weird. So what happens in the next 2 episodes? Because as you guys have pointed out, we only get 8. We only get 8 episodes. There's only 2 more left. And now we might get a longer one, but these episodes have not really been very long either. So we might have an hour left of this show. What do you think is going to happen? I'll start with you, OG. I'll go to OG, and then just in case Brian's got a hard stop at 7:30, right, Brian?
Yeah.
So I'll go to Brian next just to make sure we have enough time. But what do you think?
I think I have this feeling the handing over the Darksaber a little too easy, right? A little too easy. I have a feeling the next 2 episodes we're going to start seeing some drama, some cracks in the relationship between Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. I think we're leading up to something with those two. Absolutely. The uniting of the Mandalorians, that's definitely coming up. I think there will be some sort of, at the very end, some sort of hint of, I don't think we'll see him. I think they're saving him for Ahsoka, but I think that there might be some Thrawn stuff at the very end of this season. I think it was episode 2, I believe, either 1 or 2, where little Grogu was in the ship and he saw the space whales. That was thrown in there not by accident. The space whales are very much connected to Thrawn. I think Thrawn will either be mentioned, hinted at, or something at the very end of the last episode, right? And then that'll carry over and kind of promote Ahsoka, right? So I think we're kind of going in that direction. I'm hoping, I don't know if this is going to happen, I want to see a little more from Grogu, right? I feel like in this season, they're like trying to look. Okay, he trained with Luke Skywalker, right? And all we've seen him do is kind of jump around and do these cutesy little things. I want to see more from him, and really start to come into his own a little more. They're trying to do that, but they're not going far enough with it. Hopefully, the next 2 episodes we start to see a little bit more of that. Develop him out as a character and not just be sort of like the cutesy thing. Oh, look at him. He's eating a thing. Oh, look at him. He's swirling in the chair. Oh, look how cute he is. He's hugging the little I forgot the guy's name with the welder, whatever. The little monk.
Oh yeah, the
Babu Frick.
Babu Frick.
Babu Frick. Yeah.
Look, it's so cute. He's hugging the little Babu Frick.
Yeah.
I want to see more from him. You got to develop him as a character more, and more of his own thing, and not just the cute sidekick, because I think that can get really played out. I think we're kind of getting there already, to be honest with you. After we're in season 3 now. He's got to be his own thing. So hopefully, the next 2 episodes we start to see that a little bit more. But overall, I think we're going to see a little bit of drama between Bo and Din, maybe a lot of drama. Hoping to see some Grogu, kind of fleshed out and come into his own a little more. And I think we're going to see some big Thrawn hint at the very end of this season. So that's where I'm at.
All right. What do you think, Brian? You on the same page? You see it a little differently?
I think pretty close. I do think that it would be really unexpected if we don't see Thrawn at least in a post-credit, scene. There has to be something that says, "Hey, this threat is coming."
Like a Book of Boba Fett kind of tag.
Yeah,
exactly.
At
the end of season 2. Yeah.
And it might not be actually Thrawn on screen, but at least something that goes like, "Hey, know this name. This name is coming back. I do think. I guess I've heard some rumors from some contacts that I have that there is a big twist of some sort, or some sort of something that will divide the fan base. Essentially, that some people will be really upset about it, and some people will be really elated about it. So I don't know what to predict on that angle. I will agree that I think Grogu feels out of place right now. It feels like we've almost forgotten. He did demonstrate immense power in like essentially just stopping a Rancor in its tracks, but now he's struggling with things. It's like they want to still have him like kind of figuring out his powers, but it's like we established that he had a certain amount of control. So I do feel like there's some sort of pull back and forth about like, what is his place? Are we going to treat him as someone who's no longer a completely a child and is learning to become whatever, teenager, young adult? Or is he the baby? Is this still Lone Wolf and Cub and he needs to be the baby? Because then maybe we shouldn't have given him that power in Book of Boba Fett. I do think though that whatever happens, in the next 2 episodes, I as others have said, I have hope that it could still pull the season out of the trash heap for some. I've really enjoyed The Bad Batch, and the second season of The Bad Batch wasn't as strong as the first, but I don't know if anyone watched the last 2 episodes. It was like some heavy, really amazing, stuff and stuff that was tying into essentially the where the clones go and how the clones were sort of, used as a product almost, and disappeared from the Star Wars universe because of the fascist uprising of the Empire. So I think there is potential here that these last 2 episodes are really going to set a tone of like, hey, this is where we're going. It might have felt meandering here, but this might not be like as satisfying for you as where Din Djarin's going, but this is where Star Wars is going. This is where we're heading. The last thing I would say is I really don't think we're going to end the season without seeing Sabine appear in live action. It feels like she has to show up, to deal with everything that we're heading with the Mandalorian.
It would feel natural for her to show up because we are talking about the Mandalorian, right? And we know that she's going to appear in live action in Ahsoka, so it's very interesting.
And she has connections with Bo-Katan. So, I mean, that would make an easy connection, to go, oh, and now this character goes to Ahsoka. Please follow her,
That's an interesting idea. Captain John D says, I think Mando dies. Bo-Katan reclaims Mandalore, and Gideon returns for a final battle. Wow. Mandalore itself. That's interesting. I'll do you one even better, Captain John D, to incorporate some things that Bryant and OG were saying about Baby Yoda. I think he pulls an Ezra Bridger, right? And force powers the space whales there, and I don't know. I mean, it could happen. It sounds kind of cool, but it'd be an interesting idea if you kill off Din Djarin. I mean, I at this point, with what we're hearing
about Pedro,
exactly, I wouldn't be surprised if they do something like that, and the Mandalorian becomes Bo-Katan and her kind of foibles and so forth, which. I mean, I really do like Din Djarin a lot, but Bo-Katan's story is very, very interesting. It's pretty compelling, and so I could see value in that, but it would be very divisive for sure.
True is I've heard a few rumors that the Mandalorian of the title is Grogu, and so what if the death of his father is what compels him to actually become a full-fledged character along with Bo-Katan.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, because so right now he's sort of like he's still kind of the baby, and maybe the death of Din Djarin sort of forces Grogu to grow up a little bit, right, and come into his own. That's an interesting theory, Brian. I like that actually. I like that a lot.
As somebody who's walked both ways, right, between the Jedi and the Mandalorian, that's interesting. That's interesting, Brian. You just kind of blew my mind there. Look, I was hoping for some kind of Mandalorian conflict, right? Mandalorian Civil War. Unfortunately, it looks like now I think these band of mercenaries were just hired to break out Moff Gideon, and that's kind of what's going on there, which is kind of a shame. But it could lead to some very, very cool stuff if there is a final showdown on Mandalore. That could be very, very cool. But it's definitely like, man, we're two episodes left. How big or how wide can this go? And these episodes have been fairly short, so I worry that not going to necessarily stick the landing. And if it's going to be divisive, oh man, that is going to set everything ablaze.
well, and killing off Mando, that I could see that being like such a divisive thing, because like you said, Dre, like Bo-Katan's story is dope as hell. So some people might go, "Oh, this is pretty cool, actually," but I can see other people going, "But I like Din Djarin. I don't want to," right? So it's like, oh god.
I have a couple things. Let me walk through a couple things that let's talk about what we know has been foreshadowed. So the whales, we believe, point to Thrawn. So we know the whales have appeared. Whales point to Thrawn. We did see a through line where Grogu was scared, and Bo was telling him he needed to overcome his fear. We know what fear does to Jedi. Fear is not good for Jedi, but he hasn't had to deal with that. So was that foreshadowing, or was that just a throwaway? We know that Moff Gideon has basically been foreshadowed the entire show, and yet we've not seen him at all. And it is more likely that we would see him than Thrawn in these final 2 episodes in terms of him being a part of those 2 episodes. We also know that Greef Karga gave the Mandalorians a whole territory on that planet, on Navarro.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling that what we are going to see is a splintering of shows. We're going to see Ahsoka take off in one direction. We're going to see Bo-Katan kick off in another direction. Katie Sackhoff is a lot more available than Pedro Pascal is. Why can Pedro Pascal say these things? Because he's very much in demand. We'll see how he feels 5 years from now when he's maybe not in demand as much.
Pedro didn't go on the media tour like Katie Sackhoff did, and now Katie Sackhoff's at Galaxy's Edge and so forth. It's kind of weird how they're really pushing her out there.
Exactly. So here's my final thoughts, and then we'll close up here and get to some comments after Bryant leaves. I think that we're not going to see much of Thrawn. If we do see him, it's going to be the end tag, like you guys have already talked about. I totally agree with that. I don't think we're going to actually see much more to do with Mandalore, because I think this is going to be an offshoot into a different season. I think more so what we're going to see is we're going to see a conflict with Moff Gideon and set him up as the big bad for trying to take over Mandalore. But for right now, the end of this series, we're going to see the Mandalorians back on Navarro. I also think that if Din Djarin dies, which we are now kind of dealing with, I think what we're going to see actually happen is that that gives Grogu even more reason to be afraid and more reason to go to the dark side and then have to deal with those emotions, something that he maybe isn't that ready for right now. That's kind of my theory that goes pretty closely along with your theory, and just picking up on some things that we saw from the series so far. So with that in mind, Bryant, I know you've got a hard out, so why don't you tell the folks where they can find you, where they can listen to us talk about the Mandalorian some more on the Fanbase Press, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, go to fanbasepress.com. Look for Fanbase Press on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The podcast, The Fanbase Weekly, is also on Facebook and Twitter and Apple Podcasts. So that's where you'd go to hear all of our discussions. As I mentioned, we just released an episode on Bad Batch Season 2. So definitely check that out. But just a pleasure to be here with the three of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Open invitation anytime you want to come back on.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
good
night, everyone.
All right.
Take care, Bryant.
All right, we'll see you later.
So now you've heard kind of what we think. We've seen a little bit from the chat about what they think. Let's go ahead and go back to some of the comments we've seen here and see if we want to address any of them. If you guys have got questions or comments you guys want to throw back out that for us to address, we can do that here as well. And then you guys can bring up anything else you got on your mind.
I'll tell you what, this chat has been fire. This whole friggin' video, it's like ridiculous. This one zinger after another. I'd like to feature more of them, but we just don't have enough time. And
I know, it's amazing.
If anybody's on chat replay here and watching watch the chat for sure.
Yeah.
That's some great stuff. Go ahead, OG. Sorry.
Absolutely no. Our buddy Captain John D says Navarro is possible. Good point, Jay, as their new home.
Yeah.
So
all he
at least
says,
partially.
Pedro's character in The Last of Us only lasts for so long. That is very, very true. Man, that Last of Us sequel game. Oh boy. Okay, so Grogu becoming the Mandalorian, interesting. That's something.
This is interesting because killing off Din Djarin, while it might upset fans, and while like we all love Din, he's a great character, I think from a story perspective, though, it might be the smartest move. Because what it does is it forces Grogu to become a better character, a deeper character, and kind of break out of that like cutesy, like I'm a sidekick shell. Mm-hmm. Hey, it sucks to lose him, but it might be the best thing for the show, to be honest with you.
Who does he team up with after that,
then? Maybe Bo Katan. I don't know.
I'm thinking
one
Bo,
of our there was somebody that I was talking to on Twitter, I believe, and I don't know if it was BJ Vincent or if it was somebody else, but we were talking about how there are going to be more and more gray Jedi that show up because Ahsoka is sort of a gray Jedi,
right?
And I think that if Grogu starts to go to the dark side, there's a lot more opportunity for him to sort of live in the gray, so to speak, right? And so I think that you could work him into some of those types of conversations. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen Grogu. BJ Vincent says here maybe Grogu can tap into the dark side while still remaining in the light like Mace Windu. We've seen him like Force Grip Cara Dune, for example, right? When they were arm wrestling that one time and do some stuff where it's like, ooh, that's not necessarily something a Jedi should do. We've seen Luke Skywalker do that, and obviously he is, he's got his teachings as well. It's a very kind of interesting little theory there, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Now there is some talk of Aaliyah Aloha says, if you go back up a little further, I'm a romantic. I ship Din and Bo, but also if he vanishes, then Omera. Now I don't know who Omera is. Do you guys know who Omera is?
I don't. I do not. Aaliyah, if you could put that in the chat for us.
Yeah, who's Omera? But I think that from what I've seen in the show thus far, there was a few people that were saying, "Oh, I'm shipping Bo and Din." I don't see any evidence of a romantic connection between the two of them. I do see a mutual respect, but I'm not sure I see not that you shouldn't ship them. Go for it. That's awesome. Do what you want. But I'm just thinking from a storytelling standpoint, I think it's more likely that in dying, that would actually solidify some things for Bo as well, because now somebody who lived the creed is somebody who she really respected. She kind of was growing to respect the covert, but this just gives us a little bit more background into, okay, now I'm one of my friends who really believed that also died, so I should give more respect to that side of the table. So I think that there's some powerful things there that I think could show up.
It's interesting about like shipping like Din. I kind of felt a little bit of like sexual tension between him and Gina Carano's character. I could see more shipping if they're, well, now that's not going to happen, but those two characters maybe a little more than Bo.
Omera, so Bryce Dallas Howard's first directorial debut for The Mandalorian. If you remember that episode, it was on that like little village where we actually see Cara Dune for the first time, right? And do you remember there was this lady from the village who I believe had a daughter who wanted Din Djarin to stay.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I remember.
She was like, she looked like kind of Native American, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen here.
Okay.
There was that whole community that had like the ponds, and then there was the giant AT or the ATST.
Right.
Omera.
Yep.
Yeah. I gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they had a connection. I could
Of all
see
the
that.
connections, that have existed, that is actually the most romantic connection for Din. In
Absolutely,
my opinion.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. That's a good pickup, chat. Really good pickup, John D and Aaliyah Aloha for that. That's fantastic.
Homage to Silent
Fantastic.
Samurai for sure. That's what I was going with, Jay, when you were saying like where Mando started, right? It was definitely there was some Japanese inspiration along with that Western or space Western type setup, and now we're entering kind of a new world where it's bigger than just in story. So maybe he goes as a result. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a risky thing because they want to keep Grogu around, and obviously there's value in keeping Grogu around, but like then you have to pair him up with something because Grogu by himself doesn't really work.
Right.
So it's like we gotta figure that out. Even
There'd be some long episodes of Grogu just doing this through the scene.
exactly, right?
Yeah, I think where we stand right now, and things can change. At where we stand now, I think it would be Bo. I think Bo would kind of take him under her wing.
Yeah,
it makes the most sense.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
that's interesting though. I mean, when I hear about the kind of this Mandoverse, right, that we're kind of constructing and what that could really mean for the stories that play out in it and also the stories that follow it, I think it's really, really kind of fascinating. It seems obviously they're definitely setting up for that. I think Ahsoka will tie into that more. It's unfortunate that it had to impact season 3 so heavily because I think there was like a really cohesive story that they were trying to tell there, but it was like, well, now we have to integrate all this other stuff in it. How do we do that most effectively? And it didn't quite come off the way I think was originally intended. I think there was like a real theme here.
Yeah.
And it conflicts with some of the other stuff that they need to address in order to kind of build this universe up. I also think Bo and Din Djarin, I get like almost like a Moses and Joshua type feel there. I don't really ship them at all together. It's really like they have a mutual respect there, obviously, and they have a mutual goal, and that's kind of where I see that at.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what we get out of these next 2 episodes, and then what we get out of Star Wars Celebration, right? Because after we finish up these 2 episodes, Celebration's not too far away. And Celebration's going to be pretty big this year. There's everything from announcing Kathleen Kennedy's retirement to announcing new movies to there's all kinds of rumors about what's going to happen at Celebration.
Isn't it this weekend? I believe
April 7th. Yeah,
tomorrow.
April 7th.
Oh, so it's even faster than I thought. I thought it was in May.
That's why Alia was saying that they're going to announce the Dave Filoni movie tomorrow. At Celebration.
And that's also like, I was kind of taken aback by too, OG, when I was watching the Den of Nerds video the other night. He was like, this weekend. I'm like, this weekend? Oh my gosh. So we've got so much to kind of take in. It's going to be a wild ride the next couple weeks for sure. And then we have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is also, I think, going to be instrumental in shaping Lucasfilm's future.
And Ollie brings up a great point. It's in the UK, so a lot of stuff, the panels are like at 3 a.m. California time. So when we wake up, it'll be like Christmas morning, y'all.
None of them are being streamed, by the way. None of them.
Nope.
There was a comment. I'm going to go back up to this comment, and then we'll close it out here. Okay. There might be an Orange Nerd Show in our future with all the Celebration announcements. So we'll have to see what that looks like.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to just shout out Kiki and Luca because I hadn't shouted them out yet. So what's up, Kiki and Luca? And then I also wanted to say, let me go back up here. Kevin Davis. We'll end the show here. It's Lucasfilm related, not Mandalorian related.
Okay.
And I was just arguing with Josh Taylor from Modern Mouse, who has been a guest on this show multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
I was just arguing with him about what the biggest box office movies were going to be. Kevin Davis, we're just going to talk about one of them. Kevin Davis says that he thinks that Dial of Destiny is going to be a $1 billion movie. What are your box office predictions for Dial of Destiny?
Here's the thing.
I had a conversation with with OG about this, and I think you remember what I said, OG. It was like, this is the biggest question mark of the year. But go ahead.
Right. No, absolutely. It's the biggest question mark. It really hinges on how good the movie is, because Indiana Jones is a really, really beloved franchise. And if they can stick the landing and, they can pick one of the 700 endings, right? No, just kidding.
Nice.
If they could stick the landing, right? If they could stick that landing and give us a really, really good Indiana Jones movie, I think it has a real shot at $1 billion. But if this thing premieres and it's super divisive and there's issues with it, I think it'll do well because it's Indiana Jones, but it's going to struggle to hit $1 billion. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But here, real quick, Dre, real quick.
Go ahead.
One of the things working for this movie, though, that like The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy didn't have, is that it's following up the Crystal Skull, right? So Crystal Skull was like panned by fans. Fans hated that movie. Force Awakens was technically it came after the prequels, but like in the Star Wars timeline, though, it was really like Luke, Leia, and Han's follow-up. Yeah. So you're really kind of following up the original trilogy with the sequels,
correct?
Which are very strong, beloved movies. With this movie, with Indy, you're following up Crystal Skull. The bar is pretty low there, so that might benefit it, I think.
That's the thing, right? So in the canon, or I should say, in the cinematic canon and how they were released, audiences' last scope of Star Wars was the prequels. And we'll remember at that time, they weren't perceived very well. No. And around the time that Force Awakens was coming out, which is why Force Awakens really evoked that original trilogy feel so hard, right? It was like, it's going to be a return to form. This is the characters you love, in the setting that you admire and all this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, maybe to its detriment in how vigilant it was in attempting to recapture that original trilogy magic. But that's, I think, what benefited Force Awakens to a large degree, right? Setting and characters, right? This has the potential of doing, I think, just that, OG, with how it followed Indiana Jones 4, right? Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though, okay? It has to make over $1 billion just to break even, right? We've heard budgets anywhere between $325 to $350 million. If that's the case, then we're looking at well over $1 billion just to break even. So I hope it makes that much because, well, the company's not going to be in a good place if it does not. And even after the fact, even to make a profit, it has to make more. Here's the thing that's working against it. A couple things. One is there are challenges, obviously, with Harrison Ford at this age, right? Does anybody want to see an aged Indiana Jones? That was a big criticism against Crystal Skull. If they actually achieve those effects and that the aging process that we've heard so much about, and obviously might have led to the expense in this film, then that could work. The trailers haven't been lighting everybody ablaze. They haven't been the most well received. So that's, I think, got a pit in everybody's stomach. Like, ooh, how well is this actually going to be pulled off? Also, too, we have to understand how much international play will this get, because many markets they've never even seen the original films and don't even remember Crystal Skull. So is this going to play as well when it goes to a place like China or South America or even various parts of Europe? That's going to be, or maybe even Southeast Asia, that kind of region there. That's going to be a real kind of like question mark, I think for me. Now it could do very, very well in the States and kind of surmount some of those challenges. in a similar way that we've seen films maybe like Black Panther have done, right? They were a bigger hit in the States than they were internationally. That could actually occur here. But man, this is a big question mark for me. This really is, because I could see it going both ways. I think it does achieve around $1 billion, but I don't quite think it gets much past that. I'm not seeing a Force Awakens 2 here or a Avatar, for example.
Dre, if you could, because if I click on Alia's comment, it just pops it up on my screen. She has a link. I guess she's saying it's tracking pretty good at the moment. Found out about it. Yeah, she has the link right there. If you can click it, and then we'll go ahead and share it.
And while that's coming up, I'll give you my prediction. I think it's going to make around the same money that Top Gun Maverick did.
Interesting.
And here's why. I think so. All of those things that Dre said are very much the question marks, right? That we have to take into account. But we've got James Mangold is coming in to direct it. They are going to give this film the film circuit. They're going to take it to Cannes, and they're going to. I thought that was, by the way, an April Fool's joke, because I thought it was like
they're going to take it to Cannes.
That's what they said.
They're going to take it to Cannes. They're going to probably take it to Sundance, I believe, as well. I heard.
Oh boy.
And so for me, here's what I see that as. And we know that the reshoots, some of the reshoots were black-pilled, but here's the thing. We also got some pretty good insights from non-black pill commenters that Iger was involved in the reshoots. What that means is that this is a movie that they need to make money. If it's going through the film circuit, it's likely not to get panned, because you would not take the movie to the film circuit if it was going to get panned. You would say, look, let's hold off on this. Let's not let the reviews come out. Let's not get this in front of too many people. But what they seem to be doing is they seem to be tripling down on this, which means that even if the reshoots happened, those reshoots were for the improvement of the film. And so that's what I would see personally as this is going to get a pretty big return, because otherwise why double down on a sunk cost fallacy? You wouldn't do it, right? Like, you just say, well, let it be what it's going to be. And Disney's not content to do that. So I think there's something there. And
Jay, I really like the comparison that you made with Top Gun Maverick, because Indiana Jones, I know nothing about the execution of the movie. Obviously, I haven't seen it, but it has potential definitely to be a Top Gun Maverick if they lean into that old school Hollywood masculinity like Top Gun Maverick did, and it was very successful for them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but then you have Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Well, I mean, it's
that could
okay
be the impediment there.
Well, I mean, it's okay to have another female. We have the.
That's fine. No, it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and we know that she has a very particular interest and pursuit when conveying characters on screen.
Yeah,
I think that's true, and don't get me wrong, she makes me nervous, because I tried watching Fleabag and I just did not like it. My wife and I did not like it. I think her personality is, but here's the thing. We do know that sarcastic females perform very well in Indiana Jones films. Because we are giving Indiana Jones an excuse to be the masculine hero. If he's paired with, it's a little more awkward when he's not paired with a sarcastic, strong female. It works much better with Marion from Raiders than it does with Willie. Yeah, it does not work with Willie as well, because it just makes it seem like Indy's the smart one and he's using this lady for her looks, which is ironic because it's Steven Spielberg's wife. But with Marion, there's always this back and forth, right? There's this, she swings the mirror and hits him in the face.
That's a good point.
I did not mean to make this an orange nerd segment, but I just thought that was an interesting point that Kevin brought up, that it's going to make $1 billion. I agree with that. And I think it is going to make over $1 billion.
I'm looking at the tracking right now, and it's tracking like Fast 10. Right? I think that's the best analogy according to this chart right here. Here's the potential issue with that. So if you look at the Fast and Furious franchise and you look at its performance throughout the years, right? Its high was with Furious 7. Obviously, that's when Paul Walker passed away, and he was presented posthumously in that film. But it has gone down in terms of viewer interests, and Fast 10 is actually a good comparison because it is budgeted over $350 million in the kind of the same vein that Indiana Jones is budgeted at, right? It also is a franchise that plays really, really well overseas, which I don't know about Indy 5. But if it's tracking at that level, and I'm guessing Quorum is restricted to North America probably, and it's tracking. I don't know that, but I'm assuming it is. That could be a potential issue here because I told OG when I heard about the budget for Fast 10, I was like, oh, I don't know. That seems like a very expensive movie. I mean, that's one of the most expensive movies ever made at that point. And I don't know if it'll actually get back its box office right there. If you look at the chart right here, you'll see Furious 7, 1.5, The Fate of the Furious, 1.2, Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw. Obviously, it's a spinoff, but kind of an indicator of where the franchise is going right there. Didn't even crack $1 billion, 760 million, and then Fast 9, 726 million. So if it's tracking similar to that, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to come in personally. So I'm looking at the Maverick numbers right now, and worldwide was 1.4, almost 1.5. I don't think it's going to maybe do as big as that, maybe. So I'm thinking maybe in the more like the 1.2, 1.3. But I still think it's going to make money. I still think because this is what I'm banking on. If they release a bad film, it puts it in jeopardy Harrison Ford's legacy with Disney.
Right.
You do not want to. He already had to be a part of the sequel trilogy. You can't bring him back and do the same thing.
Well, there was a contingent that he would come back for the sequels if they got to do Indiana Jones 5. So, like, this is a lot's riding on this.
This is his legacy. And Disney, I don't think Disney can mess with that legacy in any kind of way that damages that. So I think that's going for them. I think that the James Mangold thing is going for them. I think that the fact that they're willing to do reshoots to get it right, and the fact that it's going to be released through the film circuit. You don't release these kind of films. You don't release a $295 million budget film through the film circuit these days. You release the smaller time films. So the only reason I think they do that is because they go, man, I think that this needs to be bigger, and it could be bigger, and we need to get people's eyes on it earlier so that they can have that big sense of opening. We'll see.
I've seen some comparisons between this and Top Gun Maverick in the chat right here. I do think that could be, like you said, OG, a masculine film and so forth. You have to remember, too, though, that came out in like the summer time period where there was like it was a down year for Hollywood because they had thrown everything on streaming and everything like that with 2021 and for a little bit of 2022. So like there wasn't a lot of competition, right? And that's why it got a re-release. That's why it had long legs. Indiana Jones will not benefit from that. It's going to be a very crowded summer. You got films like Oppenheimer coming out, obviously. Fast 10 will have come out already, but you have some things like that, Guardians of the Galaxy, all that. Like you have just a whole bunch of stuff coming out in the summer, right? So it's going to have to compete alongside those things. I don't know. It's just, man, this is tough, right? It's the biggest open question. I think it'll make around $1 billion, but not much more than that, and it might need to. And
here's the other thing too. We got to consider. We just saw today that Universal is announcing. Well, they announced it officially that the Super Mario Brothers animated film is actually going to digital on May 9th. So that's a very short window. You're seeing short windows with all these studios. They're kind of getting in the theatrical game, like get in and get out, right? So where before, in yesteryear times, the pre-Pandy era, you would have a summer movie go all summer. So how is that going to affect indie where it's like, is there going to be that much crossover, right? Because like Guardian, when does Indie comes out in May, right? Or no, I'm sorry, like June.
June. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even think Guardians will even be out in theaters by then, because I think doesn't Guardians come out
May 5th?
Yeah, Guardians might be on its way out by the time Indie even gets to the scene with these windows lately.
I got the dates here. Indiana Jones 5 comes out, what is it, June 30th?
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy May 5th. Super Mario Brothers obviously has already come out. Let's see here. Anything? Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, if I'm not mistaken. That's what that is. 6/2. June 2nd. Transformers, June 9th.
You know what I'm saying? A lot of these movies are going to be out the door already. I mean,
Yeah.
Possible.
It's sort of a good time frame. You've got the holiday week with July 4th, right?
Mission Impossible 2, July 14th. That is
okay.
just
So that'll
2
be
weeks
the
after
biggest
Indiana
competition.
Jones.
that's huge. Yeah,
Harrison Ford going against Tom Cruise. But I think if Indy does poorly, it'll make 750. If it really does poorly, it'll make 750.
Yeah.
The question is, if it's good, I think it makes $1 billion, no problem.
Yeah, if it's good, I think it makes $1 billion, no problem. But it has to be really good in order to offset, I think, the lack of international draw. The Flash comes out June 16th, to John D's point here.
Yeah, The Flash will outperform Indy. That's interesting, John. I'm still kind of iffy on that one. Now, I gotta say, I'm not an Ezra Miller fan at all, and I will not see this movie because I don't care for him or they. Sorry, I don't want to. But look, this Flash movie could potentially be a banger, and it'll do very well. We'll see. I don't know. I
think the only thing, Captain John D, because I think The Flash is going to be very good. It's going to be a very good movie. It's going to get a lot of people to go see it. The only problem that I'm seeing right now is that in order for these movies to do really, really, really well, based on what we're seeing in theaters recently, now we've gotten full orange nerd here, so I apologize, OG.
We're good. We're good.
In order for these movies to do really, really, really well, they have to pull in people who are outside of their normal base.
Right.
And so my concern for DC in the current moment is that pretty much, okay, so this works in concentric circles. The Keaton fans, as you say, John D, the Keaton fans will show up, the Batman fans will show up, the Ezra Miller fans probably don't exist. So you've got these. So you've got these concentric circles of how is it going to break out of these molds. And even if it is an absolute banger, the problem I have is I'm not exactly sure how many people are going to show up for a DC universe this is the last of the last movies Aquaman 2, but I think that's going to be a giant disaster too. So I'm just not sure. It will do better than the DC movies that we've seen because it's going to get good press, I think, but I just don't know how many people will show up to theaters with their kids and be like, this is going to be great for all of us. Let's go see this. I'm not sure. I'm really hesitant about that film.
So if you look at like Shazam, right? What happened there? Okay. Your core didn't go see it. And your core is what gets other people interested.
Correct.
So if they're not interested in this, that's going to really impact it. I think the best move that James Gunn could do right now is say, hey, there is absolutely potential for this character in my new universe. We have big plans for Flash. Go see it because it's gonna be meaningful with what we're doing here. That's the number one thing he could do to help this film's chances. Will it do better than Indy 5? That's interesting. But Flash has got some problems coming up. But it's interesting because between Flash and Mission Impossible, Indy 5 is right there in the middle, so it's going to be interesting.
Yes, yeah. and the DC problem with the transition between the old universe, cinematic universe, and the new James Gunn verse, it kind of reminds me of the challenges that Disney has with the depoliticizing, right? Because you have Iger coming out and Disney saying, "Look, we're gonna be more cognizant of parents' comfort levels." We saw him say that at the annual meeting, right? And we're gonna get the woke out, basically what he's saying, or we're gonna minimize it, right?
Right. But
you have all this stuff in the pipeline ready to get released that already has all that stuff inserted in it, like the Little Mermaid and probably the Snow White live action. So they have to, like, they're saying one thing, we're going in a new direction, but then you have all this residual stuff from the former mindset getting released along the way. So it reminds me very much of DC, right? We got the Gunverse that we're looking forward to, but we have all this residual like AT&T stuff that's coming out along the way. Yeah. It's challenging.
Whose idea, by the way, was it to interview Alan Menken and have him go into the lyrics of the songs that are going to be included?
Yeah.
What
horrible idea.
Oh my God. Like that. is terrible. I can't even believe that they let him utter that. You could have done it like behind the scenes and not have people catch on and whatever and all that, but to front load this film with that kind of bad press, not a good start.
Iger's next move with this accountability campaign that he's got has got to be a crackdown on all of the people getting involved with it's got to be now Iger. If anybody can control the media, it is Iger, right?
Yeah.
But they've got to control the media in such a way that it's like, you ask political questions, you don't get a part 2 next year. If you ask political questions, we're taking our cast and crew and not putting them in front of you, because you're asking people who are passionate about things to show up to an interview and talk about them in such a way, and yet that's bad for your films, right? Like it's just a disaster right now. He's got to get that under control, or else no one's going to believe him when he says we're concerned about what families are thinking about.
And I think there's already steps being taken in that approach. OG, you want to share my screen real fast?
Yeah,
we're not going to get into it in depth here, but kind of relates to what we're talking about, right? So Asad Ayaz, I believe this was announced today, right? OG has been named the first ever chief brand officer of the Walt Disney Company. Asad Ayaz will report directly to CEO Bob Iger. It says here, in an email to staff, Iger and Ayaz, quote, will be responsible for stewarding and elevating the Disney brand globally across the entire ecosystem of company touchpoints and consumer experiences. Ayaz will continue as the president of marketing for the Walt Disney Studios. In the email, Iger mentioned Ayaz led the effort to create Disney's new Super Bowl commercial, the Disney 100 campaign commercial. So this is some of those words right there. This reminds me of like a Xenia Mucha kind of figure who was said to be, a very feared but powerful influence over media and their coverage of the Walt Disney Company. This kind of gives me those kind of vibes, but you kind of want a brand ambassador, just kind of like controlling the narrative and message around not just the Walt Disney Company itself, but also its products it produces. And I think that's where this is an answer to. And Ayaz, I mean, like we got to get somebody in here. Jay, you took the words out of my mouth when you brought this up, but like the social media chatter with creatives and fans, that has to be addressed, right? We don't want necessarily Rian Johnson, but we also don't want a Gina Carano situation that, we had to kind of pull back on that, and really kind of control that interaction right there. But also like the narratives that are being cast about Disney, especially from, headlines like the Alan Menken thing. It's like, dude, like we got to control this a little bit better. And I think this is a step towards that.
Yeah. And this guy's a very front facing guy. He's like in the role that he had before, he was on Twitter. He was very active on Twitter. He was kind of like the chief marketer, I think, for like Walt Disney Studios or what have you. So I think that he's a really good choice for this brand manager, and I think he'll be very like a very public facing figure with the Walt Disney Company. And I think it's a good move. I think you need to sort of unify the company messaging. You can't have like Lucasfilm, Star Wars Twitter over here, doing their thing, and Marvel over here doing their thing. You gotta really get more of a laser focus. Disney is. Their brand is kind of their brand image is kind of everything, right? For Disney especially, it's not Paramount. I mean, Disney, their image matters, and so they got to tighten this up.
There are some clouds overhanging the Magic Kingdom at this point, right? And it's people are kind of seeing that. Go ahead, Jay.
The exact thing you should not do is do what they did with the Star Wars account, which is to double down, to attack certain parts of the fandom. Like that was awful. So this guy's going to have to get real used to saying the views and opinion expressed by our actors are not always the views and opinions of the Walt Disney Corporation. Right. And then he needs to go address those people afterwards and say, look, if you want to keep working with Disney, we know you're passionate about that. You can be passionate about that in your personal life, but if you show up to do Disney press tour, you don't say those things. You say those things in some other forum. And they've got to just hammer that message over and over and over again.
I think it should
work.
be implicit in the contract. Look, if you work for the Walt Disney Company, here's a code of conduct that you have to follow because you're kind of a brand ambassador in your own right?
Absolutely.
And look, if you don't like that that arrangement, fine. There's a couple other studios down the road that you can actually speak to. But when you do business with the Walt Disney Company, and obviously they have a little bit of domination at the box office right now, owning 60% of it or whatever, then you follow these rules. And I don't think that's too much of a stipulation right there.
No.
Those ethics and morals clauses in contracts and so forth have existed before in the past. I'm not saying it should be super rigid, but there has to be some control right here because this is getting out of hand.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
You can't have like a Brie Larson out there like, I don't hate white men, but that whole thing. Yeah, exactly. You just stay away from all of that stuff and
Stay
just
away. Yeah.
So.
Well, gentlemen, we'll close it out there. Fantastic conversation. Thanks for going. We even went into Orange Nerd territory, which is maybe just a special preview of the Celebration show that I'm sure that will come out as well. So OG, where can people find you besides this very channel?
Okay, you can find me right here on YouTube, Orange Grove 55. You can also find me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55. And Jay, fantastic show. I want to thank you, brother, for having me on. Always a good time. Always a gracious host. Thank you, sir.
Of course, anytime.
There you go.
Man, Dre's just out here making me feel like I need to ride some Star Tours and
I know, right?
Oh my gosh. Dre, where can people find you?
Hey, the best place to find me is going to be at Bash Guy on Twitter. It's right down there, and go ahead and type it in, and it should pop up on the Doge app now. I would say the Bird app, but it's not what it is right now. It's kind of cool. But as Christine Waysons McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows, including the one you're watching right now with Story Geeks with Jay, where we're breaking down all of the episodes of The Mandalorian as they actually come out. But there's a whole host of things I'm sure we'll be talking about in the future. I believe we have a Citrus Corner scheduled for tomorrow with George, talking about all things that just happened with Walt Disney World and so forth. Very, very interesting developments there. So you want to go ahead and subscribe so you get insight in those shows. Orange Nerd, obviously, we're going to have something about Celebration, I'm sure. So stay tuned for that. And, of course, my own show, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Love it. And I just want to send a very special thank you to the chat. The chat today was absolutely fire. BJ Vincent, Captain John D, Aaliyah Aloha, Slimer, Matthew Muir was in there. Who else have we got? There's so many. It's hard for me to find all of them. But I know that Jonas stopped by. Drunk 3PO stopped by. Kevin was here. Kiki and Luca were here. So just fantastic. Appreciate you all. Theme Park Casual was here too. He's always so cool about posting our links in the chat as well. So thank you to all of you, because the chat makes us even more stoked to be here, more excited to talk about these things, and we can't wait to talk to you guys about them every single week. Thanks for tuning in. Follow me right here at Jay Sherer. Go check out How Stories Work with Jay Sherer as well, the other YouTube channel. But in the meantime, we will be back for more shows, 2 more Mando episodes. We'll be talking about those. Join us for those as well. It's sure to be wild, because everything's wild these days with Lucasfilm. Everything is wild. So show up for those shows as well. Everybody, thanks again. We will talk to you later.